it really was born out of this idea of carving new space, right, for Spanish language books. Helguera traveled this project for nearly 10 years across the United States. We have different cities here: Boston, Anchorage, Chicago. What was unique about each time that it was presented is oftentimes it was the only Spanish language bookstore or art installation in its city. And so we're lucky to be in LA, right, where we have, our Latino culture, our Spanish-speaking communities. We're strong in numbers here, and so it's very special to be able to host this exhibition here on its 10th anniversary to reflect and celebrate this project. And for us as a team, thinking about what kind of events we could do, something that we really wanted to do is talk about how do writers and publishers get their work out into the world, especially with the focus on Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, communities, Spanish-speaking, bilingual, cultural specific. And so that's how we put together today's panel. We have a wonderful multi-generational panel of women in the field, right? And we're so honored to have you all here. I'll do a brief intro and we can begin the formal conversation. Just so you know, a little housekeeping, we do have 2 entrance and exits here. If anyone needs to use the restroom, feel free to come in and out. The restroom is down the hall, either doorway, down the hall, they meet at the back. And after our talk, we'll be able to have a Q&A as well as light refreshments, and we have some materials that we can look at from our panelists too. So let me go ahead and share some formal information of our panelists here. I'll start here with Dr. Beatriz Ruiz Silva, who is a professor of chemistry on our campus at Isela College. Come on in. Yeah, feel free to find a seat. We're just getting started. Welcome. So Professor Ruiz Silva is, as I mentioned, part of our campus community. Come on in, welcome. We have seats on both sides. And published her own book, Dichos que Aprendí en Mexico, which I understand was published through Amazon, so I hope we can talk about that process today. Continuing down, we have Norma Fabian Newton, who is an arts advocate, writer, and founder of her own organization, Fabian Flores Publishing, which seeks to really highlight Latinx narratives online, through publications, and through formats similar to what we have today. So we're really honored to have you here, Norma.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And of course, Viva Padilla, who is a writer, editor, translator, poet, really, I would say a leader and emerging, kind of established really voice in our field. And so we're really honored to have you here as well. And last but not least, our moderator for today is Isela Rangel, who is our education and public programming consultant. And what's so great about having Isela here is before the pandemic, when we were planning the show, Isela was part of our team and was helping us think about the show and the events that we could produce. And this show got paused for a couple years, and now we're able to bring it back and bring Isela back for this event as well. So please join me in welcoming our panel and starting the conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, that's very loud. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so happy that all of you guys can make it. I'm very excited to be moderating today's event. I first want to start off by continuing the same note that Joseph left us off with about the exhibition and its correlation to our event today and creating that space and cultivating a space for Latinx voices, Latinx work to exist, and especially in the United States. So the question that I'm going to propose to each of you to start off, anyone can feel free to join and start off the conversation, is each of you have your own paths as Latina writers and publishers. Can you talk about how you carved your own space in the field and what motivated you to carve your own space in your particular works? Anyone can feel free to join the conversation.
Sure, I'll take that. I can start. So I've always been, I was always one of those kids that really preferred to read and write. And I think that for me, the path for me really started at childhood. And so I'm a first generation. My parents were farm workers when they first came to this country. I grew up in Watsonville, California. Not a whole lot of mentors around. So my options were, as they were told to me, I could go work in Hopiles, I could be a teacher, or I could trying to be like a go work in a bank as an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, those options didn't really sound viable. I made my way to law school because of the reading and the writing, hated it, turned to writing, ended up becoming a New York Times published writer, and realized that while I enjoyed writing, really, and sharing my story, really what I was more interested in was creating a platform that could help bring nuanced stories, our stories, into the world. And so that's what I've been working on for the last couple of years. It's been about trying to publicly create a company that centers our stories, our American narrative stories. And what does it's trying to envision a system that functions independently and that centers our creativity at every step of the process. So from the attorneys that I work with, to the editors, to the writers, what does it look like when we're in charge of our narrative? What does it look like when we are the ones that filter what our stories look like?
100%. So I would like to know how Viva and Professor Ruiz, how do you guys feel about this? Can you share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. Is this on? Oh, there you go.
Hello. So I had a very strict childhood, very old school Mexican parents that really didn't allow me to express myself at home. So I was told to be obedient, and I was told to keep quiet. I was never able to really express myself with my parents. So my parents never asked me, how was your day, mija? How was school? They never asked me, they never talked to me. It was just like, I got home from school, it was like, ponte a hacer esto, ponte a hacer lo otro. And it was just like, okay, so. And especially with my dad, like my dad was a domestic abuser. And so even more, there was more of like a threat of violence behind like any challenge to his authority, or like me trying to express myself, right? So I spent a lot of time by myself, kind of like meditating on like what I wanted to tell him, or what I wanted to tell my parents, or how, it stayed with me. I think it's a very natural like thing to want to share, with your family, and I was never able to really do that as a child. So I started writing in my diary, I started reading, kind of going into my own little world. Like I didn't have my own room because it was like 8 of us living in a small house. So like I would go to the closet, I would go under the table and like go read. I would go outside and read in the garden, or like in the trailer. We had this abandoned trailer, and I would pretend it was my house. And I would go in there and I would read, and I would daydream, and I would write. And I think that really like put me on that path. I didn't know I was a writer. I really didn't know I was anything until I got into 7th grade, and I did like some assignment for class in Catholic school to add to the strictness of my life. I feel like super Catholic. So like I wrote like this horror story. It was like gory. It had a lot of just things I can't mention, and my teacher was like, oh my God, this is really good. And then my principal read it, and she kind of was like, are you okay? Like, this is like crazy for a Catholic girl. But they were like very like, okay, you're a writer. So then that's when I started thinking like, oh, maybe I'm something. Maybe I'm somebody. And I started just writing anything that I could, and it just kind of took me on this path of just pretty much becoming a prolific reader and just experimenting with writing. And then once I got to high school, I like really doubled down on writing. And I was able to study a little bit, so I did do some community college, but for the most part I'm self-taught. So I did have like internships with like the LA Times, Red Hen Press, and like I was on the newspaper at LACC. And so I learned a lot of like the basics of design and stuff like that. So, and to add to the story, I don't want to make it too long, but I would also read literary journals when I was in high school. And being from South Central, you know, it's like I was so isolated from like any other culture because South Central is so like particular to itself. It like has its own vibe and everything. So for me, reading literary journals were like, what is this? I don't understand it. To me, it was like, I didn't know what they were writing about, you know, like when I would read other like contemporary poetry. And so I told myself like, I want to have my own literary journal, and I want to know what people think. Like I want to know people that I meet. I want to know what they think. People that are close to me, people that are in my circle, people that are in my neighborhood. Like I want to know what they think about things. You know, what they think about life, what they think about like the future, and so that kind of like made me years later. And then I started my literary journal called Sin Cesar, which I recently relaunched as Sin Cesar. It used to be called Dryland. And so my idea is to find voices that are, you know, that don't know that they have something to say, people that don't know that they're writers. I try to find people that have that urge to write and kind of, you know, help people get started. So I really, most of my work is like people that have never written and want to write. So we publish them, and it's mostly Black and brown folks. But yeah, that's short version.
Thank you for sharing that. And before we move on to the next topic of conversation, Professor Ruiz, can you share a little bit about yourself and your book that recently came out, Dichos que aprendí en Mexico? And share a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I'm very honored to be with these three accomplished women, female, and role models. But I'm just a beginner writer, a writer in the works. But I'm very happy to share with you how to start, the beginning. That's what I'm here for. In spite of that, I'm not the youngest. I'm the one which is going to tell you about the very start. And I have been a chemistry professor for the last 25 years. And my reading list included, on those 25 years, mainly chemistry and education articles. So did I write this book? By the way, you can take it free to go. Did I write that book by chance? You will be a judge of that. My take on that is that my idea is that 5 factors have contributed for me to write that book. The first one is that I grew up surrounded by books. The second one, I left Mexico 25 years ago. When I was 25 years, I left Mexico. Then my daughter, I was in a conversation with her and I used a dicho, and she didn't understand what I was talking about. Then number 4, my grandkid was born, and everything came together in a trip I did to Washington, and I have all day to myself. Why I grew up surrounded by books? Because at the time I was in middle school in Mexico, the curriculum included works by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Amado Nervo, and the textbooks were free. I'm not sure now, but you have lots of literature in the curriculum to enjoy yourself. My parents, an elementary school teacher and an employee from the government, had a small library with very interesting work as well. So that influenced my desire to write, that I didn't know at that time, of course. Then leaving my country made me very analytical of my upbringings, of my culture, and of my country. So that was something also that I considered contributed in that particular book. My daughter is a well-educated lawyer who is fluent in Spanish and in English. And one day I was talking to her about el que anda con lobos aullar se enseña, and very politely she tells me, Mommy,
Yes, sir.
lost. What are you talking about? And the birth of my grandkid was a life-changing experience because I had my daughter, and of course it was a life-changing experience, but at that time I was young, I was inexperienced, I have to learn to be a mother, I have to study, I was in graduate school. So it was a totally different experience with a grandkid. Still, I'm learning. We never are experts in how to treat a kid, but it's more enjoyable, and you think more in the kid that you're thinking in what am I doing, what shall I do, etc. And the trip to Washington came because my husband had a full day. He's also a chemist. He had a full day of activities by invitation only. I couldn't join him. And I had visited Washington before, so I decided, I don't know exactly what was the trigger to put everything together, and I decided to stay in the room, and at the end of the day, when he came back, I told him I brought a book for Leo, and I call it a book, but it was a document in my computer, but I was not really thinking about publishing at that time. I was just thinking in my grandkid, my upbringing. Both he and my daughter know Spanish, but we never spoke with I became very literal as soon as I came to America. You have to speak properly to be able to make yourself understood. So the sayings, I wrote it in that day in the hotel, but it took 2 years to get it published after many corrections, many changes in format, etc. But that was my aha moment when I decided that when I retired, I'm retiring this summer, and that will be something that I will really enjoy writing because I realize I have so much to tell to this multicultural generation that is something I really enjoy.
Thank you for sharing that. It seems like the common thread with all three of you is that your works came from your experiences and wanting to put out your narratives and your voices and your experiences and be writers. So the next question that I have for you, that along with us talking about publishing work, what were some of the challenges that you guys faced along your paths and journeys? And if you guys wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit of that for us. And perhaps what you have done in order to transform the world of publication within your own works as well.
So challenges in terms of publishing?
Mm-hmm. With publishing or just being a writer in general in the publishing industry.
Well, I think first, my motivation was to start a literary journal to kind of like find voices. And then I eventually got into the scene and everything, and I was like, okay, this is how it is. There isn't a lot of our voices out there in the mainstream. And so that really kind of has been a challenge. It's still a challenge. But I can only do my part, you know, I can only do what I'm doing, and I hope that like people resonate with it, and like but some of the challenges I'd say are just finding the right people to work with is really difficult, you know. Like LA is not as like it's not like San Francisco, where it's like a very literary city and there's like a community that's been there for decades. LA is very like fragmented, and especially the Latino community in terms of writing and publishing. We don't organize, like we're not very well organized together. And so, you know, that's one part that I've been kind of like, I don't want to say it's broken my heart because I'm not like super sad about it, but I do know that it's like something that I wish would be different, because we could be so much more powerful and bigger and stronger if we were all like together in it for the word, you know, for the importance of the word. But we do live in LA, and the seduction of like possible fame and all that does affect people, unfortunately. But I do see that there is a lot of good work being done by like independent publishers. but we're all kind of like in our own little corner, you know what I mean? So I think that that's one of the biggest challenges in LA is like, how do we all come together and like do it for the word? And you know, I don't know. I hope that we can find a way to do that, but I think that's one of the many challenges that I've kind of come across. That kind of stands out in my mind. Of course, you know, there isn't enough representation just in publishing, in the publishing industry in general. I mean, there's like, Latinos make up like, I don't even know what, I don't know what to say, 30 million, 40 million? In the United States, that's, don't quote me on how many, but I know that it's a lot, we're a lot. And for us to not have the same amount of like books being put out, it's just, it's not right, you know? It's not, it's just like discriminatory. So I do hope that like doing what I do brings people together and kind of like fills a void in some way. But I do know that like there's a bigger thing at play, and that can be, for some people, it can be very like heartbreaking, you know? Like, hey, there's not enough resources for us, there's not enough like, we're not well organized, you know? It's hard. If you're getting into publishing and you're getting into all this, it's not easy. But yeah, like I commend people that stick through it.
So I can answer that question. I think for me, one of the biggest obstacles has been, and I hesitate to use the word obstacle because it is both an obstacle and I also think it has been at times, what I'm going to articulate has also worked to my advantage, and that's the fact that I'm an outsider to the industry. So I realized that there was an issue and that I was no longer going to sit by idly and just let it happen. And as a result, I've done a lot of research and I've really thrown myself into it 100%. And the reality is that I'm a total outsider to the industry. Because I'm building a traditional independent publishing house with a very specific vision, it is a slow build and it is a very expensive build. And as an outsider, I'm often not taken seriously because it is such an ambitious vision. That being said, as an outsider, I do think that I'm able to look at the industry and say, well, this is where some of the other players get it wrong, and this is where they get it wrong specifically with regards to our community. This is how I think it could be done better. This is how it could be more efficient, and this is how I'm going to choose to build it. So I think that the position that I'm in is both an obstacle at times, and at times it gives me an incredible amount of perspective, which I choose to interpret that as power. I also think that, as Leah mentioned, the fragmentation of our community affects our overall ability to be a more, to be taken seriously, I think, at times. And I think another very real obstacle is just how expensive it is to be in the industry. If you want to publish, if you want to print in the United States and print with ethical printers that are paying their workers, that are doing right on so many other levels, the cost increases tremendously. So when you factor in the way you want to do business, it's really expensive.
Yes, I can feel both of your concerns. I experienced both of them. The document from Washington, I started thinking about publishing only when I was thinking it would be very nice if I take my grandkid to the bookstore and I kind of help him him to find my book. And then he finds out it's about savings that he doesn't know anything about, in spite that he knows Spanish when he turns 13. Then we started to make our classes inclusive, so we changed them anytime, and more inclusive and equal for everybody. So you have to start looking at your students a little bit more to be able to see what can I do next semester different, etc. So I started to look at my students, and they have the same background or very similar, either than my daughter or my grandkid. So I said, well, I would love to, I learn with them about their upbringings, even when I'm teaching them chemistry, and by that observation about what do they like, what do they want, what will help them, makes me observe them more, and I'm learning with them. So I said, well, the book published will be nice for Ben to know me now, right? And I know what the books in my career, well, come from editorials. And I said, well, I'm going to look for an editor, right? New York editor, the bestsellers. And it was a search in Google for several months, and you can find information on how to edit, persons that will help you to edit your book, silent writers, grammar, illustrators, what blogs you should read to make your book marketable, etc., 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 but not exactly how to approach an editorial house. So I found a name which was a literary agent. Okay, the literary agent is the person who talks to the editors, and you don't talk directly to the editors, you give it to the literary agent, and then they give it to the editors once they filter in some way. But I didn't find a literary agent either. Not even, I said, well, do they cost something? So I didn't know how to get a literary agent. I was getting disheartened, but I saw the opportunity. One colleague of my husband published a coloring book of molecules. So I love the book. Oh, this is great for the kids, etc. And he says, I published it in Amazon. Publish it. It's very easy. So at that time, Amazon would publish the paperbacks, and Kindle would publish the ebooks. You have to submit two different pages to publish the paperback together. So I went with the paperback, and they had nowadays they are together. You can find them googling KDP Publishing, because if you find Amazon Publishing, it is going to give you all the advice of who can help you, how much it costs you to do this, etc., etc. But the publishing itself is in KDP Publishing. And then they have this, you can select the size of your book. I looked into my daughter's books, and I selected the one that looked more or less like mine. You can select, you have the format already made for you. So you have you have your document in Word, you paste it in there, and it immediately gives you a table of contents that you are going to correct because it's not perfect. And then you're going to insert the pictures, and you're going to format a little. You're going to format for telephone, for the iPhone, for the phone. You're going to format for the tablet, and format for computer, and format for paperback. So, but all that is pain-free. There are instructions in a video, and step by step, do this, do that, you have these options. So it was very, very enjoyable, and it's free. They don't charge you anything. They publish it in Amazon. I have the book in paperback, in ebook, and also the Audible. Yeah, Audible I think it's called, produces the audiobook. There are persons that advertise in the Audible web page that are willing to speak your book, and you send them the sample. They send you samples of how they talk about it, and what is the tone of their voice, etc. And your book is ready there in there. So all that was enjoyable and pleasant. However, who are you going to look in in the United States or anywhere for a sayings book in Spanish, a dichos book, what are the chances I have sold 2 books, one in Spain and one in Mexico? The others, I'm giving them to my students, to my family, I really enjoy it, and I'm waiting for the 13th birthday of my grandkid to give him his book, right? But it's not something that you do to sell easily in the independent publishing because it's in Amazon, but it's a needle in the haystack. You need to, of course, you have keywords, etc. But my book, at least, is a very small niche. It's not even for babies. It's for a person who knows Spanish and English and doesn't know about sayings, right? So it's a small niche. So that's what I'm working now, and that has been the most difficult part. How to advertise, because Amazon advertise for you in the same. They have a procedure. There are these types of advertising. This one costs you this one costs you that. But I have to experiment them. I have to read them carefully. So that's something I will do as a first project, how to advertise the book when I retire in the summer. That has been the most difficult challenge.
So it seems for each of you that based on your experiences, whether it's the cost of publishing your work or just the things that are missing, or like not having the right accessibility, or not having the presence, a Latinx presence in the publishing industry, each of you have still carved your own way and managed to deal through the difficulties and the challenges. So I also I'm pretty sure for other aspiring writers and publishers who want to enter the field that they might come against the same challenges. So can you offer any recommendations or tips that have worked for you guys in publishing your work, or for your companies? What have your companies offered for other Latinx folks to be able to submit and to be able to enter this field? Anyone could go ahead and speak. Anyone can go.
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking for advice on entering the field
Yes.
of publishing.
Yes, or so how your publishing companies have offered that accessibility to others.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do, so we're very much still building. And what we try to do is we try to provide information. Part of the issue with the publishing industry is that it's so opaque. So there is a lack of information across the board. What's the difference between independent publishing and self-publishing? Why would you choose one over the other? Why would you want an agent? Why would you not want an agent? Why would you want to work with a certain type of editor? Why would you want a ghostwriter? What is a ghostwriter? Why would you want to work with a writing group? There is so much information that is unavailable to our community because we do not have a history in this country of access to this information. So what we are trying to do is provide some of that information, as much as that information, for free to writers. That's one part of what we do. For aspiring publishers, I mean, we're a really small operation, so if somebody approaches us, we try and help, but the reality is that we don't have a whole lot of resources on that level. The best thing that we can say is that we try to collaborate as much as we can, because that's really what it's all about. And we're really still trying to figure out a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. Because we're trying to center our creativity and our perspective at every phase, for us, one of the biggest, like another obstacle that we're finding is that distribution and printing is a really big, those are two big obstacles for us, because if we want to print in the United States, as I mentioned earlier, not only is it very expensive, but because of the systems in this country, most of the printers are not owned by people of color because they're very, very expensive. And so who do you work with? So by having conversations with other people in the industry, you realize what you have to negotiate and what you have to compromise on. So I think, to go back to your original question, one of the things that we try to do is to try and be in conversation and to try and problem solve collectively. I think that it goes back to the collective effort.
All right. Well, I'm going to just give you a little blueprint for anybody that wants to get into publishing. Like I said earlier, if you're gonna get into publishing, you gotta have grit. Like you're gonna go through a lot. You're gonna be reading a lot of instructions on how to fix the margins and how to do, this is assuming you're doing it all yourself. And I would highly recommend you learning everything, like learn InDesign, learn like how to design a book. I think that will liberate you from like, because I mean, once I learned how to do stuff on InDesign, I was just like, oh my God, I can make so many books. It's amazing. So I don't have that much time to make that many books, but I'm like building up my little catalog of stuff that I put out. But it's amazing. Like once you learn those skills, like you're unstoppable. So I would say like learn how to design a book. So that way you don't have to go to Amazon, you don't have to go to like an online company. You can work with a local press and like maybe you're not gonna print 1,000 copies, but maybe you'll print 50 copies and that'll be. And if you have an ISBN on top of that, you'll be in the Library of Congress. So like your creation will not die. It's not gonna just have just because you have 50 physical copies, I mean, it doesn't mean that it ends there, 50 copies. So I would say like learn InDesign, first of all. And I know that sounds like bougie because like it costs so much to learn these programs, but even if you know like Adobe Photoshop, it's pretty much the same thing, you know? So like learn those skills. And I mean, if you're barely starting out, right, and you don't have any money, I would say like just do a zine. Just start off with zines, just create your own thing, spread it around your friends, pass it around different coffee shops or wherever you go, leave one there, you know, just put your little hashtag or your little, what do you call it, your Instagram handle. Like just get it out there, it doesn't matter. Start off somewhere, that's how I started. I started off with a zine, going to like, me and my friends would get on the bus and pass them around and like people would donate, people would give us money. And you know, for what? for some little crappy little stapled little thing, but like you start learning that people care. So people do care. And that's something that you learn as you get into publishing. So if you're getting into publishing, know that you're gonna go through a lot. I've been doing this for 8 years, but even before that I was doing it. I mean, officially with Sin Cesar, I've been doing it for 8 years. But before that I was doing another zine, and then before that I was doing another zine, you know. So like I had to build up to where I am now. It took a long time, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And in terms of like publishing, getting it published like cheaply, Amazon, I don't even want to say their name, but that company will, if you don't buy your own ISBN, they will keep the rights to it. So if somebody tries to find your book, they will only find it on Amazon. So what you want is you want to use another company called Ingram Spark, and they charge you $30 to upload your book, but it gets into like a distributor. So that means that bookstores can order your book. So even if you don't have it in your hand, like a physical copy, you can put it into the system, whatever book you want. I mean, it could be as radical as you want it to be. But just keep in mind that like, don't talk about Cuba too much, for example, because then they'll shut you down. But you see what I mean? Like there's avenues, there's ways to go around it so that you don't even have to pay anything. And of course, you always want to have a physical copy. Like for the literary journal, we don't have a big, we don't print out 10,000 copies. We print out maybe 1,000 copies. But those 1,000 copies go to the community. People are actually reading it and people are passing them around to their friends. So that's also really important. It's not just how many copies of the book can I print? It's more like how can I make this one copy really effective? So, you know, you bring people together with events, you make copies of the book, of the poems in the book and pass them around as a sample. There's ways to like bring community together even if you don't have any resources. And I mean, that's how my literary journal has been staying alive for the past 8 years. Sometimes I published 100 copies, sometimes I published 300 copies because that was all I was able to afford. But since I was always, you know, I was like the zine kid, right? Once I got into putting out books, there was already people that were supporting me. Like, people were already knew me, so people would support by buying advertisements and stuff like that in my literary journal. And just there's ways to make it happen, you know. Unfortunately, we live under capitalism, and you can't get away from like having to pay for stuff. But like, there's a way. There's a way. And also, if you have connections to Mexico, like Mexico, they are over there. They're killing the printing game and the publishing game. They're so prolific in terms of like the universities are giving out prizes, or they're publishing so many people, so many young people. So like, go over there, make connections. And they also have the tradition of the printing press that we Latinos over here don't necessarily have because we're not from here. But like, our cousins are you know, primos and primas over there, they know how to work the printing presses. So you can find them over there, and they're so kind that they're willing to help you también. So this is all from my experience, you know. So like, I wouldn't tell you anything I don't believe, but I truly believe that like printing, publishing, there's always a way. There's people care. There's always a community. And even if LA doesn't have all the cool stuff that San Francisco has, or like New York or Mexico City, like, it's still like a place of so much potential. And I mean, we're all gathered here today for a reason. So yeah, I would say ponte las pilas. If you're gonna get into publishing, get ready, because it's tough, especially as a woman.
Thank you guys for sharing all of your stories and giving those recommendations and tips. We're approaching the end part of our session, so I just want to go ahead and give you guys any opportunity to share anything else that you guys might want to share with the audience before we go ahead and wrap up. If not, Professor Ruiz?
I would like to add a little bit about the marketing, social media. I didn't mention it before because it's something I have to learn. I grew up without the social media, but that is an excellent marketing tool because everybody uses it, it's free, etc. So that's something to consider. Another thing to consider when you are you publish independently, I think we have a responsibility to publish properly in terms of grammar. I was very good at this. I am very good in Spanish, that I could read something and I said, that looks wrong. Because I was reading, and when you read, you see how the words look like. So I understand the languages are evolving, but if you're writing something, please make sure that your friend, your teacher, proofread the grammar, because I think that is something which, because you can publish independently whatever you want. But I took very much care of that because I wanted to leave something grammatically correct. And it's something I would say, please pay attention to that very much. Another thing is, I don't give up on publishing eventually with a publisher, but my idea for now is I'm going to grind, simply because it's so much fun. So please do it.
So I'll share, for our writers, I'll say, keep up your practice. Your stories are important. Our stories are important. And if you aren't writing your stories, someone else will. And odds are they won't do it to the same level that you will. They won't bring that passion. They won't bring the authenticity that you can. So your story, your voice, our stories are incredibly important. So I would just say, if you're a writer and you're here, please keep writing. It matters. Your story matters. Publishing is an incredibly competitive and difficult industry to be in, and don't let that stop you. There are so many resources out there for you. It's just about finding them. For publishers or aspiring publishers, I would say, again, the publishing industry in the United States is an industry that is filled with a lot of outdated and problematic thinking. As such, it's ripe for a big renovation, revolution, all of it. It needs to be updated. And I think, if anybody's game, we are one of the largest communities in this country. So when we decide that we want to buy our books and that we want to see ourselves represented, we can change this industry. Please, get into the industry. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for those words of motivation. So before we end, I want to go ahead and open the floor panel up for our audience members and give them the opportunity to ask you guys some questions. If you don't mind, we have about 5 minutes. But if there's anyone in the audience that would like to go ahead and ask their questions to our panelists, now is the time to do so.
No, go ahead.
The first book I did, I was naive, and it was a small press, and when it was done, it was put on Amazon right away, and I thought, what? You know, it was put up on Amazon. And so I have a question, if it's already up, can one still put it on Ingram? Because that's the distribution.
I don't know.
Does anybody have an answer?
I know you can correct it and upload the new version. As soon as you find a mistake or something you want to change, you can change it. I'm not sure about publishing in another company. Maybe it has to do with the ISBN. You have to buy.
I did put my own ISBN, thank
then
God. You know, I did. But it's the Ingram thing that I'm realizing that they're the ones that distribute through them in the bookstores.
I see. I'm not sure about that. Sorry about that.
I think if you have your own ISBN, you can do whatever you want with your ISBN. So like you can go publish it again anywhere else. So they don't have all the rights to it, just to keep it there. But you can put, what you would have to do is you would have to re-upload it into Ingram. And then, or I think you have to pay extra in Amazon to do that.
Yeah.
Something like that. But there's a way to do it if you have your own ISBN.
You can buy several, because I bought several ISBNs.
Always buy several. I have like 20 ISBNs waiting for me. It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good motivation too. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to ask any questions?
I was just curious. I wanted to ask the publisher, what genre seems to be really the best one to break into the field right now? I mean, is it mystery? I mean, you know, if you ask Reina Grande, she's writing historical novels. There's always poetry. I mean, we got poetry all over the place. What is the best one that's going to get a rocket, that's going to have a good shot at getting published?
So I can answer your question from a couple of different perspectives. I think that if you want to get published by a large, say one of the big four, so a Penguin Random House, I think that answer is different than if you want to get published by an independent publisher, a smaller independent publisher. And then I also think that when you say, I guess my question to you would be, what define rocket? The attorney in me is like, well, do you want to be a New York Times bestseller?
Yes,
so
that's right.
So we can talk about sales. The reality is that most books sell in their lifetime, don't sell over 1,000 copies. Most books published don't sell. So to get to a New York Times bestseller, there are very, very few genres that sort of ever really make it into that into the upper echelons. I mean, if that's how we want to describe it, those entities that review and critique other books, I think, are highly problematic, and we could have an entire conversation about those existing entities, but I understand that that's not your question. So if I were to say, if you want to, so some of the books that sell the most, the genres of books that you see sell the most, I would say YA sells really, really well these days. I would say that children's books sell really, really well. I would also say that, it could be mystery, romance sells really, really well. So there are publications where you can see all the books that are sold and how they're broken down. And if you're an so if your question is because you're an aspiring writer and you want to sort of tailor what you're writing to what might give you the best shot to be published by a larger publisher, I would say you could start researching what is selling and then see if it moves you to write. That is one way to sort of work into your, to adapt your manuscript and what you're writing to possibly make that coincide. And there's another part of me that just wants to tell you, write whatever you want. And if it happens to be in one of those genres, well then that's amazing. But as a writer, I think part of me wants to just say, if you're not moved to write romance, you're probably not going to write a bestseller in romance if it doesn't, si no te nace. So.
Yeah. I was really kind of thinking more along the lines of what you were publishing and what seems to be what your house or what you're finding is popular in terms of the work that's coming in. Are you getting short stories? Are you getting poetry? Are you getting novels? Are you getting what's coming to you?
Got it. I'm sorry, I totally didn't answer your question.
No. What you said is excellent, and we could have that conversation on New York Times bestsellers list for hours because I think they're horrible. But what are you looking for? Because you know it's going to be beneficial to writer and publisher.
Right.
And we're back to dollars, but it's also about readership. It's about wanting to write and having people read it and see it.
So I have this wild theory. I think that we are so underserved as a community that I think I can create a publishing house that produces work that doesn't specialize. So a lot of smaller independent publishers specialize in, say, in a couple, they'll do poetry, they'll specialize. I don't think I need to. When the submissions window is open, we take all submissions. We're not taking Spanish submissions because we don't have the capability to do that at the moment. But the idea is to come up with a very small, tight, curated catalog that we think speaks to our reader and go from there.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
I have a question back here. I came in kind of late to browse some books, but I'm one of those people that prior to the pandemic, I used to go to bookstores a lot because I read books. I'm an avid reader. And one of the weirdest things about the pandemic was that a lot of bookstores were closed. And I never imagined myself reading a book through my phone, but I was forced to, because all the bookstores were closed. I'm just wondering, because you mentioned prices and stuff like that. I usually, when I get a book from Amazon or Apple or whatever, I see prices there for $5.99, $4.99. So I'm just wondering, what percentage goes to the author and what goes to like Amazon or Apple? Does anybody know?
In Amazon, it's 70% for you and the 30% for the Amazon. Yeah,
okay.
and that includes the paper and the distribution and the web page, everything.
Okay, yeah, I just kept on wondering.
For the pricing, they have a maximum and a minimum, and you go from, you take from there anything that you want, and they will give you the 30% of that. No, 70% of that.
Okay, yeah. So in a way, it was kind of like a weird blessing for me because I was running out of space where to put my books.
That's a good problem to have.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone have any other questions before we go ahead and end the session?
I'm curious about one thing. This is a random question, and I hope it's fun. But I'm curious to ask the panel, what's the last book you read?
After I have my reading list in chemistry and in education for my last 25 years, a colleague 2 weeks ago told me, read this book about feminists in the 60s, and it's called Lessons in Chemistry, and that decided me to go back to my regular reading list, so that is the last one I read.
Lovely.
The last book I read was Cartographies of Youth Resistance by Professor Newton. We actually just had his book launch party at my bookstore, and yeah, that's about the teachers union uprising in Oaxaca in 2006. And if you haven't read it, it's all about, it's centered around like the youth, what did the youth do to like create a social movement, and like it's beautiful, it's a beautiful book, so find it somewhere. I don't know if there's any copies here, but I don't have any copies here at the bookstore. But yeah, that would be, I would say order it from the publisher directly, so that's UC Press. As much as you can, try not to support Amazon, just try to go directly to a bookstore or to the publisher. I mean, it means a lot for the publisher to be like, oh, people are actually interested in the work, so I would recommend that. Oh, and I kind of wanted to demystify the whole New York Times bestseller thing. I don't want to ruin it for you guys, but it's kind of an algorithm. Like, you can be a New York Times bestseller and get the sticker if you've been on the list for at least like 5 minutes. If you go to if you go online and you look up New York Times bestseller, like it updates every 10 minutes and it changes a lot. So like if you're like in a niche, let's just say like you write like a memoir or something, and like if you come up there for like 5 minutes or like 5 hours or like 5 days, you're officially a New York Times bestseller. So I would recommend, if you want to be a New York Times bestseller, crack the algorithm. Just find it. I would say that it's easier than most of us think it is.
Okay, well, thank you guys.
No, what's the book you read?
The last book I read was Brown Enough by Christopher Rivas, and I just finished it. I had an interview with him on Wednesday, so among the things that I do in the book world, I run a book club for We All Grow Latina, which is an online organization, and I had the pleasure of interviewing him on Wednesday. And I'm also, I'm totally gonna out myself here. I'm a multiple book reader at the same time kind of person, so I always have, at least 4 books going. Because it kind of depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm really just not into fiction and I need a palate cleanser of sorts. So I'm also really close to finishing, no, I'm blanking. It's a beautiful book with a bird on the cover. It's El Paso border story, family. Que pena!
It's okay, you're reading 4 books at a time.
I'm gonna tell you, because I probably have it in my bag. I always carry a book. I'm sorry. But Brown Enough was the last book that I finished.
Can I make a comment about that? You all are, I'm sure, avid readers and writers, but I have found out that equally satisfying is, and it produces also more rewards in the future. Read every time you have a chance a book to a kid. When the kids grow up reading every night, it makes a huge difference at school. There is no hard subject for all the kids who read a book at night because they are used to reading. So it's just a matter of learning the new subject, etc. But that habit really helps them at school. Well, yeah. I know you are doing, but have to mention it.
Can I ask you really quick about audiobooks?
Oh yeah.
That's important, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's important. The process, I don't know if you have time, but I would like to do that with one of my books, but it's, what do you think about that? It is very, to me it's accessible, an audiobook. What do you think?
I don't know who's supposed to answer that, but I don't have much experience with that, but I do know that every writer I know who's put out a book in the last 5 years, if it's a memoir, mostly memoirs that I can think of, do put audiobooks out. So I think it's just you have to.
It's just the reader I'm concerned about, the person that reads.
Right? The audiobooks were very useful for me before the pandemic. When I had long commutings, I put my book in my tape. They used to sell them in tapes. And you don't know them because but we have tapes. And then you could listen in your long commute and make a short commute and have a nice time in there. And when my book came out, there is this company Audible. Audible. And it's very easy to publish to get your person in there who's going to do the reading for you. They charge you per hour, I think, per hour. It varies. You have to make that arrangement with whomever you select. You send a sample of your book to 5 or 6 of them, and then select the one, and then arrange the pricing. So it was very convenient. And I think one doesn't substitute the other. Because there's nothing like you have a hardcover book and you are reading, but there is room for the audiobooks. In that case, for me, it was excellent in my long commute.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to say thank you to each of you for sharing your experiences and your journeys in the field. Any last words that you guys would like to give to us?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time.
And buy the books in this library. It's beautiful. I would say support the museum and just buy some books and buy the books that are outside too.
Yeah, you all are encouraged to stay for the reception and closing session. We have refreshments outside, and if you have further questions, you can go ahead and ask our panelists.
Please feel free to take as many as you want.
There's some bookmarks from Norma's company here, Beatriz's book.